I like, click, subscribe, do all that. You already know what time it is. It's Netflix time. This movie's called The Little Prince. When an overscheduled girl befriends an eccentric aviator, he regates her with tales about the adventures of an unusual boy who lives on an asteroid. It came out in 2015. It's an hour and 46 minutes long. Now, The Little Prince stems all the way back to 1943 when it comes to the books. Its lineage goes that far back. Yeah, I grew up on this Little Prince, riding around on comets, living on asteroids and shit. No, for real, he literally lived on an asteroid, clean out his volcanoes and shit. Look at that small ass house he's in. Talking to butterflies and whatnot. How did butterflies get far out that point, living on the damn asteroid? I have no idea. This guy was a random ass crow living there. He grew a rose that could actually speak and was vain and fixated on herself. She used to get mad when she didn't get enough attention. Like, bitch, I've been living here way longer before you got here. He encased her in a glass when she got cold at night. Then it got to a point where he wanted to leave and explore other planets. How he would do that? He would get a bunch of birds together, again, where they come from, would use them to catch comets and explore. And he caught a comet to Earth in a net. Yeah, he was just about that life, catching comets and shit. Yeah, I had it on VHS back in the day. I grew up on some weird shit. So they got a couple of adaptations to pick from. Let's see what the 2015 version decided to do. Spoiler alert, let's get it. Alright, so the beginning credits, we see this picture. So right off the bat, they decided to take from the books. The 1943 versions, which honestly makes sense. So here we have this mom preparing the daughter to get accepted in the Worth Academy, I guess. So let's just call mom Kim and the little girl Sandy or something. Because I forgot their names and I don't even remember if they even told us though. Mom says they're going to ask a series of questions, but she said the one question they're going to ask you is, are you Worth Academy material? Unbeknownst to her, when she gets up there, they ask her what will she be when she grows up? Yeah. Look at their faces. They look all monotone and evil and shit. And because she's been thinking about being Academy material, she answers the question like that's what they asked her. So, yeah. And then she just faints on stage. And to push it further over mockery, it says, what will you be when you grow up, on like every sign while they were sitting out there in the parking lot. I'm like, really? So mom's distraught that she didn't get accepted at first, but she's got a plan B. On the first day of summer, they move into their new house. And for some reason, it's right next to this house. And then birds start landing on the roof. Mom's spraying her down with the hose like, fuck out of here with that shit. So when they get in the house, mom busts out plan B and this ridiculous graphing chart. It's pretty much like her schedule for the rest of eternity. It's like, what the fuck? I know she's looking at her daughter's future, which is fine and dandy, but it's kind of smothering her at the same time, too. So after that, mom's on her way to work. Leaves Sandy in the house by herself. Where the heck is her dad anyway? Well, anyway, she went around back and she smelled gas coming from the backyard. And before she could even duck out the way, a fucking airplane propeller smashed through her house. Yeah, no joke. So as she moves out the way, this old man just comes through the gate, gets his propeller back, and goes about his business. And of course, they called the po-po, destruction of property. Old man pops up like, man, what's good? He's like, nigga, you been fixing your plane again? Yeah, I know, I need to give it a rest, but sorry, I'll pay for the damages. And he gives her a jar of fucking pennies. I'm like, really? And Sandy's looking like, really? So she's just sitting there waiting on her mom to come home. She sees the devastation and she's like, yo, what kind of a nut job keeps an airplane in their backyard? But the daughter made sure the insurance company was called and pretty much everything else, so she's pretty smart. Now, every now and then his present's dad sends a bunch of snow globes. Again, where is he? What does he do? We need explanations. So as she's doing some homework, a paper airplane flies through a window. Inside it was a story about a little prince. Grandpa threw the airplane. She tossed it in the trash because she ain't trying to hear none of that right now. Back to her routines and all that. Mom was on her way to work, but then she got a card with some roses on it telling her some oops. From Grandpa, but she ain't care nothing about that. She threw it in the trash. Well, damn, Mom, he was just trying to apologize. I mean, granted, he did almost kill your daughter with the airplane propeller, but still. So as she's rolling up Penny, she starts noticing all the artifacts that are inside. She finds a sword, solar system bounty ball, I'm guessing, a seashell, a plane, and a rose. Then she actually finds a figurine of the little prince. So now she gets the paper back out the trash and she's more curious about the story. So further into the story, they show a man who crashed in the Sahara Desert. Take a guess who that could be right now in real life. I'm gonna venture to say the grandpa living next door. He was there with his plane all night looking at stars. The next morning he wakes up and he sees the little prince in the middle of nowhere asking him to draw him a sheep. But then he draws sheep and he tells him one looks too old. So he asks him to draw a sheep in the box and he's like, yeah, that's the perfect way he wanted it. He asks if it'll be enough grass for him because he's like, yeah, of course, it's a very small sheep. And the prince imagines the sheep going to sleep. So you're not going to get it on first glance, but the mythology behind the little prince is very metaphoric. So as she's only read a piece of the story, she got curious and now she wants to go see what's good with Grandpa. And she sees he does have a plane in the backyard. Yep, so her and Grandpa start having a conversation. And she starts breaking down stuff to the story like a normal person should. Like, how can he survive in the desert without food and water? How's all this happening? Da-da-da-da-da. Because you're trying to make perfect sense of things, right? Exactly. So then they go inside his cluttered house and she's like, yeah, this is a pretty serious fire hazard. He's what you call a hoarder because he collects a lot of old stuff. Well, anyway, they go back out on the rooftop and he starts explaining more of the story. Now, he talks about how the little prince lives on an asteroid, right? Keeping things tidy, growing sprouts, turning into a full-fledged rose, just like the 1978 cartoon I showed you earlier, right? At night, he kept her under a glass when she was cold. Philadelphia ran away with a bunch of birds so he could take off and fly on another comet. And now she's just looking at the stars. I talk about her looking at the stars because it's basically a metaphor for the whole movie. I'll break it down for you towards the end of the review. So when she gets back at the house, she tells her mom that she's been studying and she also made a friend. Mom goes through the charts and she's like, yeah, you could have a friend at such and such times and such hours, but not throughout the entire summer vacation. I'm like, what? How you gonna give your daughter a set schedule and having a friend? What kind of shit? I know you want your daughter to be focused, but when you do that, all that does is pushes them more to get to their friend. Well, anyway, she gets more pages of the story about how the prince went to visit the king and asked him a request about being able to see the sunset. Then he went to see this guy who claims to be the smartest man on the planet, and I'm like, sure, you're the only one on this planet. So in hindsight, he wasn't lying. Then he goes to see this guy who's apparently in control of all the stars. Once again, I'm assuming this is accurate because I haven't read the books in a long time. Well, anyway, Sandy goes to visit Grandpa a lot more often. There's an interaction in the desert between a snake and the little prince. The snake says he can help him one day if he grows too homesick from his planet. And the little prince is like, okay, I think I understand you. Once again, I'll explain that later. Then the little prince meets a fox and he says, I can't play with you unless you tame me. Which somehow he did. And Susan's spending more time with Grandpa. One part of the story, he goes to a rose garden and then he realizes he needs to get back to Rose. And the fox gives him some wisdom. See, even here we have Sandy trying to understand this part of the story. And she's not really grasping the concept of it. All she knows is that she doesn't want him to go. So to make her feel better, they go out and drive so they can get some pancakes. The problem is he gets pulled over and Grandpa ain't been driving in like 30 years. He ain't got no driver's license, nothing. And on top of that, she lied to the cops. See, the whole point of them going out was supposed to be because it's her birthday, but her birthday is not for 2 weeks from now. So Mom's obviously pissed off. She's like, you've been lying to me about the chart. You've been lying to me about the cop. Like, you've been rolling with this grandpa or whatever like that. She's like, I forbid you to see him ever again, period. She finds her stories and tears that mess up and throws it in the garbage and puts her in her room for non-stop studying. Her birthday comes around, she gets a telescope, a cupcake, and another snow globe from her dad. Again, what does he do? And if you look at the buildings, they look like New York buildings. Is he in New York? What's going on with your dad? Well, after that, she snuck in the trash and taped together the pages so she could read the rest of the story. And as you can see, you got the little prince and the guy just in the desert still. The prince tells him eventually we're going to find a well and get some water, which by daytime they do. Conflicted by everything that's going down, she goes to visit Grandpa one more time. He's like, are you sure? Like, she wants to fly with him, but he says he can only fly alone. And then he basically tells her the end of the story. So here we have the prince, and a man's is coming up, and he sees the princess face to face with the snake. See, the snake is not dangerous itself, but it's basically a metaphor of things to come. See, the animals and objects represent life and death when it comes to this story. I couldn't really imagine him trying to explain this to like 8-year-olds or something like that back then or now. But then he says goodbye to the little prince one last time. It's about little prince wanting to be with his rose and seeing the stars, and the snake bites his ankle. I'm just wondering how they would have been able to explain this to little kids back in 1943, let alone now. See, he tells Susan that the prince is up there with the stars and rose or whatever, but she's not really grasping the concept of what he's talking about, you know what I'm saying? I mean, she kind of does because she gets pissed off at the story and throws it back at him. So she sucks up all the stars off her ceiling and has it in a vacuum cleaner. Again, that's another metaphor for things to come. So on her last day of summer vacation, she gets back home and sees Grandpa loaded up in an ambulance. She borrows his kid's bike and rides it all the way to the hospital. And she's like, look, Grandpa, you can't go, you know what I'm saying? Obviously, they can't let her in the emergency room. So she finally back at home and she keeps staring at the snow globes. There's a metaphor behind the globes. I haven't quite figured it out yet. So Sandy's about to sneak out the window again. I'm not sure what she's about to do. Mom was standing by the door. She see the light goes off. I guess she just assumed she went to sleep. She climbs out the window, but the side pipe breaks and falls forward. But she's all good and gravy. She's staring at the airplane, which is miraculously fixed to perfection, right? She actually takes off flying the plane and she notices there are no stars in the sky. As she's flying into a city. I assume that she's going into a snow globe, flying into that circumference and whatnot. Like I said, it's a metaphorical movie. She flies past one building, she thinks she sees the little prince up there, but then she lands in the middle of the street, people looking all stupefied. Then he's breaking down all these rules to her about what she did wrong, like no use of turn signals, you know what I'm saying, just parking in a handicapped spot, blah, blah, blah. She committed the crime of being little because everybody's grown-ups there. So she easily escapes this goofball, dresses like an old lady so she can get to the top of the building to find the little prince. She gets up there and finds him, but surprised to see that he's an older man doing chores and work. She tries to get him to remember, but he's completely forgotten. Then he tells her about children are odd in this place, and he tells her about he knows somebody that can help. He takes her to this strict subordinate supervisor that's given him multiple jobs. Then he shows her a picture of the wall of the guys that helped the little prince. There you go. So he's teaching her grammars and basics and stuff like that, and the little prince is worried about being essential to the group. And he's just trying to change her into a grown-up. But the little prince finds his story, and he starts remembering. And then the little prince gets this fool up out of here. See? Just like that. Now they gotta get their plane back before it gets crushed. They find a snow globe with all the stars in it. These guys determined to ruin everything. The prince and Sandy are like, fuck all that. Sandy jumps on top and releases all the stars, and they fly out of there. And they reach the little prince's old asteroid home. But his rose withered up and died. But there's light coming from beyond that. Basically explaining the rose is not gone, she's here, with inside all of us. Like I said, this movie is really a life and death metaphor. How you explain it to kids, I have no idea. Well, anyway, mom wakes up, she's worried about Sandy. She goes in, sees the guardrail broke, like, what the fuck? She's looking for Sandy, but Sandy's right behind her. And she tells her she gotta stop at the hospital before school. And that's exactly what they do. So yeah, grandpa's still alive, he's still kicking. And she gave him a gift. She actually completed the whole book for him, and then she just broke down crying. Then they all just bonded towards the end. And after that, they took time to look out at the stars. The last scene shows her in class next day trying to explain this to kids. I'm just curious how she's explaining it. Well, it's not meant for us to know because music's playing in the background. And that's The Little Prince for you. So yeah, the books were amazing back in the day, like I said, back in 1943. I guess you could say Disney would be the best example of movies trying to explain life and death to kids. Well, anyway, The Little Prince on Netflix. Check it out. Like, click, subscribe, do all that. You already know what time it is. Slick, easy, out the easy, best. Big. You got a slogan.